Okay, we shall start. Uh, in the last class, we discussed about organizing the design patterns based on its purpose and based on its scope. The scope can be class or object. The purpose can be creational, structural, or behavioral. So, like this, there are many patterns uh, that are being proposed by the Gang of Four. So there is a very good book by this particular Gang of Four. I have already uploaded this particular book on the LMS. You can refer to that particular book. So out of these particular patterns, design patterns, we shall be studying as a case study four different patterns, and those particular four different uh, patterns we shall see in detail. That is, each and every documented part of that particular pattern we shall walk through, or we shall go through. I have already discussed in the class how this particular pattern, or how a particular pattern is specified. So there is a template, and every pattern is specified using that particular template. Okay. So to start with, uh, let us consider the singleton pattern. So singleton is a pattern which is object. The scope is object, and it is a creational pattern. Uh, so what is the intent of this particular pattern? It is to ensure a class only has one instance and provide a global point of access to it. Okay. So the purpose or intent is that uh, the class should have only one instance. One instance in the sense one object. Okay. So the class should have only one object, and it should provide a global point of access to it. That means it should not happen, or it should not be that that particular class itself is part of some package which is private, and nobody has access to that particular package. Okay, even you can make certain classes also private to a particular package, and if it is private, then uh, the classes which are outside that particular package will not have any access to that particular class. Okay, but here the intention is that you don't want to make that particular class private. It has to be public, whereas the uh, the restriction on that particular class is that only one object of that particular class can be created. Okay. Mm, so what is the motivation behind this particular singleton object? So it is important for some classes to have exactly one instance. Okay, so you need to have only one instance of those particular classes. Although there can be many printers in a system, there should be only one printer spooler. Okay, so only one printer spooler, that is which maintains the queue and like that. Okay, so should be there. So there should be only one file system and one window manager. Okay, so uh, when there is a central point of coordination, then the coordination work will be done properly. Otherwise, there may be duplication of the work, or some part of the work is not done. So for that purpose, you need to have one coordinator. So usually that particular coordinator class should have only one instance, and if accidentally or maliciously more than one object of that particular class are created, then that may give rise to certain problems, or the coordination will not be proper in that particular system. Uh, a digital filter, another examples of this particular single instance class. A digital filter will have one A to D converter, and accounting system will be dedicated to serving one company. Then the the problem here is, how do we ensure that a class has only one instance and that instance is easily accessible? Okay, so a global variable makes an object accessible, but does it keep you from instantiating multiple objects? So you can have the global variables, and you can have the reference of that particular object to be global, but if that particular class is global, then how is it possible that, or how to ensure that the multiple instances of that particular class are restricted? So a better solution is to make the class itself responsible for keeping the track of the sole instance. Okay, so the responsibility of keeping the track of that particular instance of the class is given to that particular class only. The class can ensure that no other instance can be created by intercepting a request to create one object, create a new object, and it can provide a way to access the instance. Okay, so this is the singleton pattern. So if you make that particular class so that it will create only one object of it, then that particular pattern of the class is called the singleton pattern. Where is the applicability of this particular singleton pattern? So use the singleton pattern when there must be exactly one instance of a class, and it must be accessible to client from a well-known access point. So that is the use of this. When a sole instance should be extensible by subclassing, and clients should be able to use an extended instance without modifying their code. So uh, these are the two applicabilities for this particular singleton pattern. The structure of this particular singleton class is as shown here. So there will be only one class. So you may name that particular class singleton. Of course, from one contest to another contest, name of the class can be changed suitably. You can name that particular class. Then it should have a method instance which uh, is required to be a static method. Okay. Then it should have a singleton operation uh, method, and get singleton data method. Okay, so like this, three different methods you should have. Of course, this particular notation is the old style notation used in OMT. Usually in the UML, we use the notation wherein the second compartment is for the attributes, whereas you can see here that the attributes are shown in the third compartment, so that you can understand that whatever is there in the third compartment is the attribute. But when you are drawing UML diagram, as per the UML standards, the attributes should be in the second compartment. So focusing on the attributes, what should be the attributes? So there should be the static variable, that is unique instance static variable, and singleton data is the another uh, attribute which should exist in that particular singleton class. Okay. Whereas this particular method, that is instance method, what returns is the unique instance. Returns the unique instance of the singleton to the singleton instance created. Okay. So that singleton instance is nothing but the object, and the reference, every object has the reference, and that particular reference is stored into the static variable unique instance. Okay, so this is how is the structure of this. I hope you know the static methods, the difference between the static methods and non-static methods of a particular class. So if you don't know the difference, then for your information, let me tell you that the static methods of a particular class are the methods which can be called without creating any instance of that particular class. Okay. So for example, this instance method can be called without creating any object of this particular singleton class. So how the static methods are called? Usually you call non-static methods with the protocol, that is object name dot method name. Okay, this is how you call the method. So for calling the non-static method, you need to have object of the class. Without creating the object of the class, it is not possible to call the non-static method of a particular class. Whereas the static methods, they can be called even before the objects are created, or you do not use object for calling those particular methods. So the class name dot method name is the way you call that particular you call that particular uh, method. Okay. So that is the difference between the static method and the non-static method. Okay. Uh, Whereas in case of the static attributes, again the static attribute, when you create the static attributes, they are created when the class is loaded into the memory. Okay, so you do not need to create any instance of the class so that the static attribute is available. Okay, so usually when you are having non-static attributes, the non-static attribute, or they are also called the instance attribute. Okay, so non-static are methods, they are also called the instance method. That means those particular methods, they are executed with respect to instance. So these are the instance method, whereas this is the static method. So here this is the static attribute, so it is not related to any instance. So even if you are creating object of the class, that then for that object, this static, the copy of the static attribute is not created. Only the copy of the uh, instance attribute is created for that particular instance, or for that particular newly created object. Okay. So this is what is required for the singleton class, the structure of that particular singleton class. So who are the participants in this particular singleton pattern? So essentially it is a single class pattern. There is only one class in it, that is singleton class. So it defines the instance operation that lets the client access its unique instance. Then instance is a class operation, that is a class method uh, in the small talk, or you can even write that particular static member function in C++. Okay, or if you are using Java, even in the Java also you can write a static method uh, and name of that particular method you can specify, okay, as instance, or you may would like to uh, make some variation in the name of the method, so that is also possible. Then it may be responsible for creating its own unique instance, okay, so that is the singleton class. Collaboration, so client access a singleton instance solely through singletons instance operation. So the collaborators, they are the users of this particular singleton pattern, and they access it by the singletons instance operation, that is the class name dot that particular method name. So how that is how they access it, and in return they get the reference to the object of the singleton. Uh, then this is the implementation of the singleton class. Okay, so yesterday I asked you the question, how can you create this particular singleton class? This is the way you can create the singleton class, which will you can say help you, which will allow you to create only one instance of that particular class. Okay, so you can define a class in C++ or in Java with a static member function instance, and the class name can be singleton. So singleton defines a static member variable underscore instance also, where the reference is of that is stored, uh, and that contains a pointer to the unique instance. So the singleton class is declared in this fashion: the class singleton, then public. Of course, this particular singleton reference, or this particular operation, instance operation, it should be public. Okay, and it is static. You can say this is it is static. That means this particular instance operation can be called without creating any object of the singleton class, and what it returns is the reference of the singleton. That is, it returns the reference of the singleton type. Okay, so this is how it is written here. Whereas in Java, you need to make little variation to return the reference of that particular class. You need not have to write star in case of Java. By default, it will be the reference. Okay, this is the C++ implementation. Uh, then protected. Okay, so what is protected? The constructor is protected. You can see here that the constructor is protected. That means making the constructor protected. That means if you do not make the constructor public, if the constructor is not public, what happens because of that? You do not have access to the constructor of that particular class. And what if you do not have access to the constructor of the class? If you do not have access to the constructor of the class, you cannot create the objects of that particular class. Getting this? If you make the constructor of the class private, then the you cannot create the objects of that particular class from outside that particular class. Okay, but here it is made protected. That means the constructor can be called from its subclasses. But as it is, if you try to create any object of the singleton class, then it is not possible to create the object just by instantiating this particular class name. Okay, but there is another way how the instance is created. So there is a method that is called so-called instance method, and this will create the object of that particular class. Then here you can see that there is a private attribute variable, that is instance, and the instance of that particular class is stored in this particular variable. So this particular private variable, this particular instance variable is not accessible to anyone. The instance is created by singleton and it is stored by singleton. So this instance variable or this instance attribute cannot be modified. This particular instance attribute cannot be modified by any of the class which is or from the outside of this particular class. Okay, so that is uh, thus the instance variable. It is of the type singleton. That means you can store the reference of the singleton in this particular instance variable. Okay, you can note that there is a change in the name of the method. Here the name of the method is instance, though I is capital here, but as far as the notations of the standard notations of the Java or UML are concerned, it should be small. uh, Whereas here the how, here you see how this particular instance attribute is a name, so it is named as underscore instance. Okay, so there is a change in uh, this names of this particular identifier that are used for the instance attribute and the instance method. That is both, though both names of both they are same, but the identifiers they are different. Okay, so that is what I wanted to tell you. Then implementation of the how is the implementation of this particular singleton class. So this is only the declaration part. The implementation, it will be like this. In the beginning, that singleton instance variable would be assigned 0, that is null. Nothing is assigned to that. Then the implementation of the instance method will be like this. This is the implementation of the method instance. Okay, so whenever this particular instance method is called, okay, so it is to be called like this: singleton dot instance by any of the class, that is class name dot method name. So this particular method will be called in that case. What the method checks? It checks whether this particular instance attribute is 0. If it is 0, so it that attribute 0 indicates that the class there is no instance of the class so far. Okay, so in that case, what it does, it creates a new instance of that particular class. Okay, so you can see the way the new instance is created. This is the this is in C++ style of creating the new there was an interruption. Hope I am again audible. Because of the call I got out of the session from one device. Just wait, I'm rejoining. Okay, hope I am again audible from uh, my mobile device. So we were at this particular method, that is instance method. So if instance is not existing, so it is the instance, you can say, uh, uh, static attribute. So it is checked. If it is 0, then it means that the instance is already not created, and the new instance is created, and its reference is stored in the attribute instance. Okay. uh, if that reference is already, if it was already created because this particular method was called earlier, then it will not enter into this. Okay, see the beauty of this particular method. It will not enter into this, and what it does is that it simply returns the contents of instance. That means earlier, when this particular method was called, the reference of that already existing object was stored in this particular attribute, that is instance. Okay, so that instance attribute will be returned. That is, the reference which is there in the instance attribute will be returned. If it is called for the first time, then also the reference is stored in the instance, and then that reference is returned. So this is how is the singleton pattern implementation. So if you implement it like this, then you ensure that only one instance is created. Okay, you can see that you can call this particular method number of times. Instance method you can call any number of time, but it will create the instance only for the first time, whereas for the subsequent time it will return the same reference. It will return the reference of the same instance. Okay. You cannot create the object of this particular class singleton this way. Okay, so this is the instance is created. So from other class, you cannot write this particular statement. Why can't you write this particular statement? Because you have made the constructor of the class protected. Okay, see here, this is very important. Constructor of the class is made protected. So if it is made protected, then you cannot instance create the instance of the singleton class in this fashion, in this pattern fashion, that is new singleton from outside the class. Okay, so it is allowed here. Why? Because this instance method, it is member of singleton class. Okay, so it is member of singleton. You can see that singleton and scope resolution operator, and the name of that particular operation. Okay, and this is the return type. Okay, so this is how this particular singleton class is implemented. Okay, so this is the sample code for the singleton class. Okay, so as I have already discussed with you, you can change the name of that particular class. That name of the class need not be singleton. So here it is the maze factory. Then in the public part, that instance method, so name of this particular instance method has not been changed here. Okay, so there is no need even to change the name of the method. uh, it returns the reference to the maze factory, that is to own class. And you need to make the constructor protected. Okay, then in the private part, it will be the attribute, static attribute, uh, which is of the self, uh, the class type, and that to the reference. Okay, Maze factory reference type of the attribute is declared as a static in the private part. Okay, the corresponding implementation will be like this. So that particular instance attribute is initialized to 0 in the beginning, or it is initialized to null in case of Java. Then this implementation of the instance method. Okay, so it is of maze factory instance method, and it returns a pointer or reference to maze factory. Then the body of this particular method is almost same. That is, if underscore instance is equal to 0, then that underscore instance is equal to new. Of course, here the name of the class is not singleton; it is maze factory, and then what it returns is the reference contained by the static private attribute uh, instance. Okay, so I hope you have just a minute. चलो व्हाइटनर लावून द्या ना मग चला त्या हाताने लिहावं लागेल आहे का बघा so this is the implementation of the instance method. Okay, so we discussed the singleton class, and the next class to be discussed is the adapter class. Okay, so that is the adapter pattern, not the class, adapter pattern. Any problem in this? Yes, any problem? Have you understood the singleton pattern? So this is one of the very widely used pattern wherever, or which is well accepted pattern. For today, we shall stop here, and the next pattern, that is adapter pattern, we shall see in the next class. Anyway, I could see that very few students are there. Have all of you marked your attendance? Who has not marked? Pooja, could you mark your attendance? So I am again enabling it.